This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and my rifle for protection, and jumped in my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15-20 miles in until I find the right spot and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, most likely a deer, with a lame leg, as it sounded like. The animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away, and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go find it and put it out of its misery. Think nothing of it after that and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that even at my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep. So I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by and I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal walk drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and stops, and I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. Nothing but trees and darkness. What the fuck? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing, just the crickets and the breeze. I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and tried not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I am hearing is really what I am hearing, or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple other different directions, all different, old men, old women, even children, and confirm that it's real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off in the air in case they came too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the nightlife was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making any noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing, listened intensely to my surroundings. No laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit and figuring that scared whoever off, I sat down and in my exhausted state I fell asleep. I wake up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, grab my rifle and listen to what they are saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost. So I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. Never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, My enjoyment of camping alone left me like I left all my gear in the woods that night. Michael, James, and I had been friends since elementary school. We'd always find time to hang out, despite the increasingly busy schedule and discovery of the opposite sex. We had been particularly busy with work lately and hung out less and less often, so Michael suggested we go camping for the weekend. James and I agreed without even giving it a second thought. We loved camping, and this was a good opportunity to get drunk together again without interruptions. I picked them up on Friday afternoon, and when I asked Michael where we are going to camp, he said that it was the same place his granddad used to camp in, and that it was highly secluded, meaning no one would be bothering us. It took us a few hours to get there, but when we did, we took our stuff and followed Michael deeper into the woods. We walked for about an hour, and it had started to get dark. James and I were a little agitated having to walk for so long to Michael's special spot. But just as we were about to tell him that this was as good a spot as any, he told us we're here. It was a big clearing, giving us a lot of visibility and room to set up our tents. After unpacking, we cooked some food and drank beer, reminiscing of the old days and exchanging news. James talked about how he wanted to become a police officer, and we ridiculed him a little bit for kicks, but after we've had our laughs telling him he'll need to arrest himself first for everything he's done in the past, we expressed our support for him. Michael shrugged, not knowing what he wanted in life. Right now, he was happy with a 9-to-5 job and just didn't care about anything more than stability. They were about to ask me about my plans when we heard a high-pitched scream echo in the distance. We instinctively turned our heads in the direction of the sound, but saw nothing. I asked Michael, who was a more experienced camper, what that was, but he said he didn't know. We brainstormed what kind of animal it could be, but after a while, let it go. We continued talking for a while around the campfire, getting ready to call it a day. Just then, I saw movement in the trees with my peripheral vision. I thought it must have been my imagination, because when I turned my head there, I saw only rows of trees. I shrugged it off and continued to listen to James's story. Both he and Michael seemed to not notice anything. A few minutes went by and I had a nagging feeling, something I just couldn't shake away. I looked at the row of trees to my right again, and still, there was nothing. Still, looking there made me feel uneasy. I decided to ignore my gut, dismissing it as my own paranoia. Not 5 minutes go by and the feeling of dread only intensified. I looked to my right again and stopped in bafflement. A few feet in front of the row of trees stood a lone, very thin tree, separated from the rest in the clearing. I squinted my eyes, trying to figure if my brain was playing tricks on me from excessive beer consumption. Was that tree there all along? Wait, holy shit. That's not a tree. It just moved slightly. I blinked and continued staring, transfixed at whatever stood there. The longer I stared, the more apparent it became that it was no tree I was looking at. It was someone, or rather something. Something too thin to be human and too tall to be an animal. I grabbed Michael's attention, and when he looked at the figure, he went pale instantly. He silently muttered, "Oh shit," to himself. "Don't look at it," he said. "Guys, listen to me. Do not look at it. If it comes near us, don't acknowledge it. Don't talk to it. Just keep your eyes on each other. Got it?" To say I was scared shitless is an understatement. "Michael, what the hell is that?" I asked. "Quiet. Just look at me and don't move your eyes away, all right?" he said with a trembling voice. I looked over to James, who was silently staring at the campfire. Everything was quiet. In fact, it was too quiet, and I only realized it just now. No sounds came at all, save for the crackling of the fire. We stared like that in silence for what felt like ages, when suddenly another sound appeared in the distance. A branch cracked, as if someone had stepped on it. From there, we heard the thuds of very slow footsteps, followed by the rustling of leaves on the ground. coming from my right side. In seconds, I saw something emerge in the corner of my eye, but I couldn't make out what it was. Michael motioned with his index finger for us to look at him, and so we did. The figure slowly stepped behind Michael, and I could see with my limited line of sight that the creature was extremely thin, not even fit for the word emaciated. It looked like a real-life stick figure. It was tall, easily towering over Michael, and probably even more than I anticipated, but I wouldn't dare look up. It looked like its body had been made from roots and branches. Slowly, the creature bent down with a creaking noise and put its head next to Michael's. I felt its penetrating gaze on me, but I stared right into Michael's eyes, who was tearing up by this point. I could see the creature smiling with my peripheral vision, and it was almost irresistible to glance at the creature just for a second, but I managed not to do it. The figure stood up, creaking equally, and stayed behind Michael for a few seconds, completely still, before it turned around and went the other way around. It was coming in my direction, and I felt like I was about to piss my pants. It came behind me, and I heard its footsteps stop. Then, the creaking sound followed, and I knew it was bending down. I closed my eyes and breathed out quietly, trembling like a leaf on wind. And then, all of a sudden, I heard a frantic set of footsteps to my left. I opened my eyes and glanced to the left, seeing James running away. There was a high-pitched scream behind me, and then the creature ran after James, its footsteps impossibly quick. "On me," Michael reminded me during the commotion. I looked back at him and listened as the creature caught up to James, who managed to let out a short scream before he was silenced. What ensued was the sound of loud screeching, bashing, slamming, and mauling to my left, while Michael and I stared at each other. It lasted for a whole minute before it abated, and the blood-curdling screaming stopped completely. Silence once again filled the air around us, and I heard the slow and soft footsteps to my left. They gradually faded and then completely disappeared. Michael and I continued glaring at each other, too paralyzed with fear to avert our gaze. Only when we started to hear the wildlife in the forest again, Michael suggested we get the fuck out of there. He told me not to look to my left, not because I might see James's body, but because he didn't want to risk the creature still being around. We left all our shit in the camp and bolted out of there. The creature left in the opposite direction, so we hoped we wouldn't run into it, but we didn't care about ignoring it at this point. We heard a loud shriek in the distance, which indicated the monster was far away from use, which put use at least momentarily. Still though, that scream was enough to freeze the marrow of the bony. We reached the car much faster than we got to the camp seat, and once we got in, I clumsily pulled out my keys, almost dropping them on the floor while trying to put them in the ignition. We drove out of there with a cloud of dust behind us, both of us shaking. "Michael, what the fuck was that thing?" I asked while going as fast as the road allowed me to. I don't know," he muttered, still pale. "My grandfather told me about it a few times, but I thought those were just stories. He said that the creature can only hurt you if you let it know you see it." "Poor James," I said, glancing in the rear-view mirror every few seconds, half expecting that thing to appear in the reflection. Luckily, it never did, and Michael and I made it out safely. We went straight to the police and reported the whole thing, to their skepticism. I can't blame them. A couple of drunk guys barge in the middle of the night, telling them about a fucking stick figure that killed their friend in the woods. After some convincing, they decided to send a patrol to the spot. An investigation was started when the police quickly found James's body. They said he'd been mauled so badly that they couldn't identify him. They concluded it was a bear attack, dismissing our story of the stick figure, threatening that we weren't suspects right now, but that it could change very quickly, so Michael and I dropped it. I don't go camping anymore, and if you do, make sure you know where you're going, or else you might end up like James, or worse. In summer 2019, my partner and I, both early 20s, decided to take a road trip to Vancouver, Canada, and then stay at Golden Ears Provincial Park. We liked camping, had spring break, and wanted to do something different and make the most out of our vacation. My partner had never been out of the US, and it seemed like a crazy new experience. It was a 6-day trip with Airbnbs in each state, and the grand finale was a reserved campsite at Golden Ears, and it was close to the water, Alouette Lake. We packed terribly, had a giant tent, brought a bunch of fruit and veggies to eat healthily, stored them in a cooler that was too small, and brought a cutting board and knife to break up the snacks while driving. We started in California, switched off driving our bright red Ford Fiesta. We drove through Oregon and Washington and made it to Vancouver. We spent a day or two in each state, drank a little too much, and stayed out late. Canada was the best part, and Alouette Lake felt like walking in a painting. We walked barefoot on the rocks with our toes in the freezing cold lake. We hiked around, saw a beautiful waterfall where we saw a couple taking pics of each other for an hour, and we started modeling the same poses from far away. Everything was perfect, and the campsite was empty except for the other couple. We went to bed early that night. It was quiet, and I woke up to crackling outside the tent. My partner was still asleep and snoring. I didn't think much of it because it was pitch black and probably an animal. The crackling continued closer to the tent. I sat up and grabbed my phone. The brightness came on, and I turned it off, almost blinding myself with light. In those 2 seconds, I could make out a person right outside our tent. I froze and sat up. They weren't moving and were close enough to unzip the tent. I started poking my partner because I had no idea what to do. They woke up and I said, "There is someone outside the tent." Then I hear footsteps, quiet footsteps walking out of our campsite. My partner starts loudly saying, "What?" repeatedly in a sleepy haze. A car or truck is parked right outside our camping area. No one is near our campsite. It starts up and then drives off. They didn't turn their lights on until they turned the corner, and we were out of view. So I couldn't make out much, but it looked like a truck. Now I'm shaking, and my partner can't put together what's happening. I want to leave, but Golden Ears locks the gatey until 6 or 7 a.m., and it's 1 a.m. So we are going to be here. I make us move to the Ford Fiesta and sleep in the tightly packed car. She falls asleep immediately and thinks I'm paranoid. Could it have been a park ranger? It seemed too weird of behavior for a park ranger. I sit there wide awake for about 2 hours. The car is locked, and I want to sleep and can't. I'm in the passenger seat, my partner in the driver's seat asleep, and it's 3 a.m. I'm sitting half awake. I hear a car slowly driving up the road. Lights off as it rounds the corner. It had to be the same truck, and I was scared, but my adrenaline was pumping. It slowly rounds the corner and pulls up directly in front of our campsite, again, in the same spot. I feel like I'm going to throw up. I had no weapon but the kitchen knife we brought for the fruit and veggies. So I grabbed the knife and tried and make myself look angry, crazy, and big. I sit straight up in the passenger seat, holding the kitchen knife. I keep it straight up at eye level and stare deadpan out at this truck in the pitch black, just like the father in the American Gothic painting. The truck stops and turns off. A light shines directly into my face coming from inside the truck, and I stare back terrified in my bright red Ford Fiesta, holding my large kitchen knife, not blinking. The truck starts up and turns on its lights, and they stay on, blinding me, and the truck pulls out and turns around and goes back where it came. My heart is pounding, and I wake up my partner and say, "We need to get the hell out." We pack by, just throwing things into our car, and sit there, awake, until 6 a.m. We drive home and don't stop. We keep rehashing and trying to make sense of the situation. We ultimately decide that we both need some sleep. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie, almost ethereal glow upon the dense woods. In the company of my dearest friends, Meg, Osmond, Alexa, and Osmond's loyal companion Toby, we huddled around a campfire. The flames danced with exuberance, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Laughter filled the night as we savored the simple joys of roasting marshmallows and sharing humorous anecdotes. Yet beneath this veneer of normality, an unsettling unease clung to the air. As darkness gradually encircled our camp, an otherworldly, spine-tingling howl pierced the tranquility of the night. It sent shivers down our spines, but it wasn't the call of a wolf, as we initially assumed. It was Toby. Our beloved canine companion was howling and crying, his eyes wide with a terror we had never witnessed before. Even Osmond, the embodiment of stoicism, paled at the sight. "Something's wrong," he whispered. His unease was justified. Toby had never cowered in fear. As the night deepened, we eventually retreated to our tents. Well past midnight, I heard a faint, distant howl echoing the earlier one. Sensing that something was amiss, I emerged from my tent to find my friends gathered outside their own, their faces etched with worry. Just as I was about to inquire about the eerie noise, Osmond, his expression laced with concern, informed us that Toby was nowhere to be found in his tent. A growing sense of trepidation enveloped us as we scoured the camp, calling out Toby's name. It was then that we heard it again, the haunting, mournful howl, louder and more disconcerting than before. In an instant, panic gripped our group. We instinctively turned toward the source of the noise, confirming that it was indeed Toby. Shadows converged at the periphery of the firelight, as though the forest itself harbored a sinister secret. After a few moments of heated discussion, Alexa, the bravest among us, declared, "We have to find Toby. We can't just stay here." With a sense of urgency, Meg, the voice of reason, tried to maintain a veneer of reassurance. "Stay calm, everyone. We'll split into 2 groups and try to find him." Despite our attempts to rationalize the situation, an eerie sense of foreboding weighed heavy in the air. Every rustling leaf, every distant sound, and every whisper of the wind carried an ominous message from the forest. Nevertheless, our determination to find Toby fueled our actions, driven by the hope that he was merely lost and frightened. As our 2 groups ventured deeper into the dark forest, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. An ominous mist rolled in, enshrouding us in a bone-chilling fog that obscured our surroundings. My group, consisting of Meg and me, stood watch at the edge of the forest, near the campsite, while Osmond and Alexa ventured deeper into the woods in search of Toby. Time blurred into a nightmarish collage of fear. We called out for Toby, our flashlights piercing the inky blackness. Shadows danced at the edge of our vision, eluding our attempts to confront them. The forest thickened, its gnarled branches resembling skeletal fingers reaching out into the night. I could barely see beyond the pale beam of my flashlight, and an eerie sensation of being watched settled over me. After some time, we realized that we had not heard from Osmond and Alexa in a while. Fear gnawed at our hearts, and we decided to make our way deeper into the woods, hoping to reunite with them. Eventually, the forest became eerily silent, to the point where I could hear the beating of my own heart. It was an unsettling feeling, akin to the sensation of being watched, as though unseen eyes observed our every move. I whispered to Meg that I hadn't heard any sounds other than our footsteps for a while, but she remained silent and continued walking. Turning around, I was struck by the realization that she was no longer beside me, yet I could distinctly hear footsteps directly behind me. Then, in an instant, a malevolent figure materialized. It was a shadowy, nebulous form, with eyes, if one could call them that, gleaming with malevolence. A frigid shiver of terror coursed through me as it loomed in the darkness. whispering incomprehensible words, a language not meant for human ears. Overwhelmed by fear, I sprinted through the forest, my gaze fixed on the faint glimmer of moonlight in the distance. The forest appeared to warp and shift around me as if it were a living entity. I could feel the presence of the malevolent figure pursuing me, taunting me with unfathomable words, an unrelenting force of darkness. I burst back into the clearing where we had set up camp, my heart pounding and my breath ragged. However, the camp was eerily empty, the fire long extinguished. My friends were gone, and I was left standing alone, surrounded by the oppressive darkness of the forest. Gasping for breath, I heard the chilling laughter of unseen entities, while the forest itself whispered malevolent secrets. In a state of panic and shock, I remained in the abandoned camp, my thoughts in disarray. The darkness closed in from all sides, and the sinister whispers of the forest continued to echo. A profound sense of isolation and despair enveloped me. I waited for what felt like hours, the sun casting long shadows as it began to rise. Yet, my friends remained absent. It became apparent that I needed to seek help, and the nearest town was my only lifeline. I gathered my remaining belongings and retraced my steps through the darkened woods. Eerie sounds echoed through the forest during my departure, its oppressive ambiance clinging to me like a suffocating shroud. I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent watched from the shadows, that the forest itself was the personification of evil. With each step, the echoes of shrieks and groans grew fainter, but the chilling presence of the unknown endured. Finally, I emerged from the oppressive forest into the outskirts of the town. My appearance was disheveled, my face etched with exhaustion, and my heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. I knew that I had to report my friends and Toby as missing, enlisting the help of the townspeople and local authorities in unraveling the sinister secrets of the woods. As I entered the town, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The town's residents regarded me with cautious, wary eyes, as if they could sense the darkness that clung to me from the forest. I made my way to the local authorities, my voice trembling as I recounted the harrowing events of that night, the inexplicable disappearances of my friends, and the ominous entity that had pursued me. The police organized search parties and ventured into the sinister woods. Even they could perceive the unease that pervaded the forest, their expressions betraying the fear that lingered in the air. However, despite their determined efforts, they found very little trace of our group. Days turned into weeks, and the mystery deepened. The police, baffled by my account of the events, could not provide a rational explanation for the disappearances. In the town, whispers began to circulate, suggesting that the forest was cursed. The unease that had taken root within me never truly dissipated, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had awakened something sinister within the woods. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, I embarked on my own investigation, delving into old maps, uncovering local legends, and consulting experts in the realm of paranormal phenomena. Yet, the more I delved into the history of the forest, the more elusive the answers became. The town's elders, shrouded in a silence born of fear, refused to divulge the forest's secrets. Years passed, but the memories of that fateful night continued to haunt me. The disappearance of Meg, Osmond, Alexa, and Toby remains an unsolved mystery, an enigma that defies explanation. The forest had claimed them, leaving me with a lingering sense of dread that would never truly dissipate. Despite the police's diligent efforts, the cursed woods safeguarded their secrets, and the dark presence within would forever torment my dreams. Yet even now, I still find myself standing on the edge of the forest, and I swear I see my friends in the distance, waving me over, beckoning me to re-enter the forest, and for us to be reunited once again.